Hello and welcome to this lecture on restricting inheritance. Now you might be wondering why to restrict when inheritance is a very powerful object-oriented feature. Now sometimes we would like to restrict that because otherwise there are possibilities that it might be wrongly used, and probably we might get some wrong results if we don't know that this particular class is not supposed to be inherited. So there has to be some way of stopping this. Now Java provides a keyword called final. When you apply that to classes, it stops inheritance. That means that as an author of the class, you have complete flexibility and control over whether your class can be inherited, can be extended by providing new features and all the stuff, or you can say no, my class has to be used as it is. Now at the end of this video, you should be able to understand how to restrict a class from being inherited and describe some of the reasons behind why this restricting inheritance is important. Now, using the keyword final for a class makes it non-extendable. Now note that final keyword can be used with a method also, with a variable also. Now with a method, you're saying, hey, you inherit my method, but do not change that. So no overriding. With a variable, even for a local or a member, you're only saying assignment can be done only one time. But with keyword final applied on a class, we say, hey, no further inheritance. Now, does not mean that the references of the objects of a final class are also final. And it doesn't mean that the members themselves are final. It doesn't mean anything. It only means that the class cannot be used as a superclass. That's all it means. Now let's take an example of a final class. Here we have a class called television marked with the keyword final. Note that we said public final class, but the keywords public and final, both of them being modifiers, they can exchange their places. You can say final public class television, no problems. It only says that the class television cannot be inherited. For example, if you try to do that, like for example, we say flat television extends television, this is a compilation error. Compiler knows this rule and stops you doing that. It says cannot inherit from final television. So the only way of creating an object is that you say new television. You can also do one more thing if you really want. You can say something like has a. Now in Java, there are many classes marked as final. Now just to take few of them, there is java.lang.system. This is where you'll say system.out.println, system.in and so on. Now this class is marked as final. Now this is java.lang.class. An object of this would represent some class, such as your product class or television class. This class can give you information about what are the members in that and so on. Now, not to go deeper in that, you need to know this is the final class, which means you can't create your own class extending this. Now, here is the most popular one, java.lang.string. Now, string is very powerful and most widely used data type in Java. Okay, so this is also marked as final, which means if you think that string class has got some functions, but I want to write my own functions, for example, string class doesn't have a reverse function. Now, what if I want to add that functionality to the string class so that I can extend and I can say my string extends the string and provide that reverse function while inheriting all of them. Now, this is not allowed. Okay, so let's see some of the reasons why that is not allowed, but let's look at some of the disadvantages. Now, since Java is an object-oriented programming language, many people think that using a final keyword on a class is stopping a very powerful feature called reusability. Now, of course, this is not really true because reusability can also be achieved apart from inheritance using aggregation and composition. So, there is another way to do. But many people think that this is kind of a discouragement because you're stopping a very powerful feature. Now, classes may not be able to inherit this at all. Now, this is solved by using some concept and very popular principle called as composition over inheritance. So, you prefer to use composition rather than inheritance. Now, what are the reasons? Why do you want an inheritance, such a powerful feature, to be stopped? Now, final classes are generally used with a class being marked as or treated as an immutable one. Now, what is immutability? If you think that an object's state or values are initialized once but should not change in the future, so then that kind of object is called as an immutable object. For example, string is an immutable one. So you create one string object, its values are set, you cannot change it. You can get the information such as what is the number of characters in that and what is a particular character in that, so on, but you will never be able to go and make the change. You can't set one single character to something else. You will have to create an altogether a new string. Now, such is an immutable class. So, if you ever come across with an immutable class, generally they are marked as final, even though the final itself has no value addition to that immutability. It just gives that this class cannot be inherited, so you don't use this. So, an immutable class is guaranteed that the calling any function on that would not harm anything. Let's take an example, class test. Now, I have a function here called do something that takes a string as a parameter. We all know that string is immutable, which means that whatever the value that we received in the form of a str, now you call any functions such as to uppercase, this would not make any change to that. In this particular example though, str.toUppercase would have converted that string value into an uppercase and would have returned a new value. So the toUppercase has never affected the original value at all. But imagine that the string class is not final. Just hypothetically, let's assume. Now, and because of this, now string str is a reference to any of its objects, any object of a string class or any object that inherits from string class. Now, this becomes a kind of a challenging. What if now the method toUppercase in the object is overridden? Now, it's overridden such that it's going to change the original value, which means you cannot now treat the argument as an immutable. You have to question that before you call any function. So, calling a toUppercase would probably go and make the original value in an uppercase. Now, since string class is immutable, now string str would only refer to a string object. Now, that kind of imposition can be done if string class cannot be inherited. Now, this is a very, very strong reason for why sometimes a class needs to be protected and say that, hey, you cannot inherit from this. And that's where final comes into picture. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why string class, system, class, java.lang.class, all these are made as final. Now, you cannot use abstract with final. An abstract class generally means, hey, do not create an object. So, which means if at all you want to realize an object of this abstract class, you have to go and create a subclass and then create an object of that subclass, so that that object is as good as a superclass now. Our superclass reference can refer to that object. So this is the concept behind abstract. That means abstract classes are encouraging the inheritance. Abstract encourages inheritance. Final discourages that. So you can see that there is a mismatch in the concept. So an abstract class typically has one or more abstract method which need to be defined or overridden in the subclasses. That's the reason why it encourages that. Now, an abstract classes encourage, final classes discourage. Now, because of which these two cannot be applied on a single class simultaneously. And that's going to be a compiler error. So let's quickly summarize what we have learned so far. Now, the use of keyword final along with a class is the way you stop inheritance. Now, that's only if you require. Or if you find some classes such as string or something like system which have marked as final, you cannot inherit them. Now, the string class defines that as a final mainly because to guarantee immutability for the string objects. The keywords abstract and final cannot be together, as one of them is encouraging inheritance, the other one is discouraging inheritance.